Thanks very much for Argano Interrel for inviting us today, and thanks everybody for joining the keynote. We got a lot to get through, so I'm just going to jump right in and get on with it. For those who don't know me, I'm Matt Bradley. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development at Oracle, in charge of all of the EPM products and services. And joining me is Harry Sankar. He's the Group Vice President of Product Management for the same set of products. I'll lead most of the chat and invite Harry to join me in color commentary, and also keep an eye out on those questions that may come in through. We'll try to reserve some time at the end of this so you can ask your questions, and we'll get on with it. All right, so this is what we're hearing from a lot of our customers, is this notion of agile finance, what agile finance fundamentally means. And it's all about a reaction to access to much more information, much more data, and what that means for organizations, enabling them to, or forcing them to a certain extent to adapt, to change, to transform in a certain way. It could be through new business models, it could be to react to competitive pressure, it could be to take advantage of new opportunities that come along. But fundamentally, we believe there's 4 key tenets as part of this. And tenet number 1 is to really build what we would consider agile operations. Most of us are being asked to do a lot more, and we're not necessarily been funded with an increase in terms of staffing and resources in order to do that extra work. And so we have to figure out ways to become much more productive. And a lot of this is about standardizing and simplifying our existing processes so that we can standardize on technology, we can standardize on process that gives us the ability to introduce levels of staff portability. So we can move individuals between different divisions, but they're all using similar processes, so we can gain efficiencies across that. It's also about increasing the speed at which we do things. So how can we close faster? How can we spend more time doing interesting things like the analytics and decision-making, and less time doing the data gathering and data collection? So we are seeing an increase in the removal of Excel as integration technology, an increase in the move of what we've seen a lot in the past is this notion of a catcher's mitt, where you send spreadsheets out to individuals, they fill them in, and it comes back to you, and you then type it in, and then use the system to aggregate it up. So it's really trying to change that dynamic, to streamline that, to spend more time doing the interesting value-add activities and less time in the mundane. Second other thing that we are seeing quite a lot is this notion of planning continuously. The speed and pace of change in business is dramatically increased. And even with the pandemic, we've seen it accelerate even more. So a move to digital, a move to different business models, a move to online as opposed to remaining remote from that perspective. And the ability then to take advantage of these opportunities or react to these is required to really plan on a much more continuous basis. Here at Oracle, we're actually planning on a weekly basis globally from a revenue perspective. So we understand what's happening in the business, what's occurring, so we can then plan for our capital investments. Where are we seeing an increase in uptick for certain services? Do we have sufficient capacity in those data centers or not? And how can we gain that line of sight and visibility to quickly shift and reallocate budget, et cetera, from that standpoint on capital? So it's this notion of planning much more continuously, but also planning closer to the customer, be it that B2C or B2B, who's interacting with the revenue stream, and making sure we're getting those early signals rather than waiting for it to occur back at corporate, and then it's too late to make that change. So it's really introducing that agility notion into that piece. The third thing we're seeing is there's an explosion in data. A lot more data is available to us, and we're all trying to figure out what's the right data to leverage and use. What are the leading indicators, which generally move more into these operational style metrics? Activations, if you're in a subscription style basis. Other elements that may give you an indication that things are working well or not so well, so you can take corrective action. But there's a lot more data and a lot of volume of data, be it from the Internet of Things, be it from sentiment value, be it from external data sources that bring it in through. And so we have to change how we work with that data. It's no longer hunting and pecking. It's using the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, and some of the more advanced statistical methods in order to really parse through that data, understand those insights, and leverage that rich data source in order to make the right decisions. Which leads us to that fourth piece. The combination of all of these is really forcing us to look at our skill sets. it's not that finance needs to become a data scientist, but they need to understand what a data science can do and being able to leverage that as another tool in their arsenal. They also need to understand more about what's happening in the business. If you take, again, I'll use Oracle as an example. When we moved from an on-premise to a SaaS cloud orientation, we had to learn a whole bunch of new metrics, subscription, churn, how we recognize revenue, bookings, and a whole bunch of newer methods and models that we need to know and understand. We need to then, pivot to understand that business model, understand how that works, understand what the drivers are inside of that business, so we can understand how best to work and operate inside of that context. So that's the sort of challenges that are facing us, as professionals in the industry. So in a nutshell, it's really about automation, reducing the mundane, getting the right information to the right person and focused on those value-added activities. It's also about aligning planning in a much broader context, bringing in those operational aspects and doing it holistically, not just planning financially, but marrying those financial plans with those operational plans. So there is alignment across the board. So everybody's working on the same piece. And that forces finance to become the strategic advisor, not necessarily the scorekeeper. So gone are the days of producing a budget and holding people accountable to the budget. It's really looking at what are the appropriate metrics going forward, things like long-term value of a customer, which may cut across cost centers. And it's really understanding what makes the most sense from that lens is to how you change and manage your business. And it really becomes that strategic advisor versus the scorekeeper model. And ultimately bringing all these elements together changes the skill sets that we need, but really helps us empower these decisions that we need to take and really helps us move from what we would consider agile operationally to become agile strategically, so that we can look at things in a much longer horizon and really drive whole organization forward better. So what we're seeing from our customers, we survey our customers every year, and this is a survey of our cloud customers, and you'll see it echoes a lot of the tenets that we've talked about before. Across the bottom line, we see things like a decrease in the number of days to do monthly forecasting, decrease in the number of resources required to run and manage these particular applications, a reduction in time to reduce the management reporting, and importantly, a reduction in time to close the books. So we're seeing that efficiency coming through. But we're also seeing, as you go across the top line, some of the more value-added activities that have come across as well. We're seeing a lot more customers leverage predictive planning as part of their process. So rather than entering forecast, have the machine generate the forecast and react to that forecast, and increasing, decreasing the time it takes to do that forecasting approach. We're also seeing an increase in the flexibility of reporting. So looking at the data from different angles and really analyzing and seeing what's occurring. We're also seeing an increase in the adoption of strategic modeling. Now, granted, some of this may be spawned out of the current crisis that we're all been working through in terms of what a recovery will look like. Will it be V-shaped, K-shaped? Will it be different in different regions? Will it be different across different product lines? And really mixing and matching those scenarios together to see exactly a risk-adjusted view of the future. So we've seen a much more increase in those activities. And lastly, we are seeing a value being realized fairly quickly in terms of the initial investment in cloud. We do recognize that is needed and required, but the return is fairly quick. And a lot of our customers are seeing realized benefits in 6 months or less as they shifted to the cloud. As we delve in a little deeper, we actually sort of asked, what are the reasons for moving applications to the cloud or processes to the cloud? And not surprisingly for this year or for last year, the ability to work remotely. As we've all gone through lockdowns, we've all not been in the office for a significant portion of time, the ability to access our systems and work collaboratively and increase those communication, even though we are virtual, has been key and important driver of shifting things to the cloud and away from desktops and away from offices per se. But we're also seeing, the traditional, cost benefits and the ability to have the upgrade been avoided, et cetera, has been part and parcel of where we've been going as this traditional SaaS orientation. And then further down, you see, a list of other activities in terms of rationalization, changes, global expansion, et cetera, from that standpoint. And those are key elements that we're seeing. If we shift across to the close, we actually see a very similar list. Again, working remotely is number one. The main reason why we needed to do that, but we're now seeing things like rationalization of multiple EPM systems. So the ability to pull your account reconciliations, your tax provisioning, and your close and consolidation into a single technical platform makes a whole lot of sense. You can leverage that skill set across the board. You can increase the connectivity of those data and intertwine those processes to be much more effective from a close perspective. Again, we see things like, the increase in M&A or global expansion really goes back to what we talked about earlier: standardization of processes, setting yourselves up to be future-proofed. This is how we consolidate. This is how we'll onboard new acquisitions. This is the process that will adopt as we expand into new markets. We're also seeing, probably a little surprisingly, is the ability to have those automated updates coming through from the SaaS as a key driver in the consolidation and close space. So even though there's a certain resistance to change, the notion that we can get the new features, we can get the new capabilities coming in a fairly unobtrusive basis is a key driver and value add that the SaaS is providing. So in terms of the cloud, and specifically the Oracle EPM cloud, there's 4 key tenets that we're basically driving the strategy forward on. First and foremost, we want to be complete. And that's really trying to address all of those important key decision-making processes in enterprise performance management, from account reconciliations to strategic modeling and all steps in between. We also recognize that we need to be connected. These processes are independent. Your process for planning or forecasting is different than the process for close. And we believe that we need to optimize those for the unique requirements that come from those processes. There's different users, there's potentially different dimensional models. And the ability to connect them together is also extremely important. So they're not working in silos, they're working in tandem with handshakes between each other. We also want to make sure that we invest as much of the intelligence back into the core applications themselves. We have an advantage of Oracle of a very, very rich research and development organization that spans everything from middleware to infrastructure to the database to S-base before we even get into the applications themselves. And as innovations occur across the broader Oracle portfolio, we've got the advantage of being able to pull those in relatively quickly and make those available to you inside of the core applications that you know and understand as planning and consolidation, et cetera. And lastly, we want to become your trusted partner. We recognize as you move towards software as a service, it's no longer about just producing product, just producing the application. It's really providing that overall service, understanding your needs and requirements, from data privacy, from confidentiality, to understanding also what you need and require from the applications as you go forward. So the ability to listen and look for trends in the fleet, understand what you're using, what you're not using, and really add value add in terms of reacting quickly to get you the feature function you need when you need it. Then EPM, at the highest level, it's everything about planning, everything about the close, broaden it from consolidation. It's really reinventing your reporting and analysis, leveraging as much machine learning as we can inject into it sensibly, and really broaden this across the enterprise, looking at everything from a finance-centric out to operations, to human capital, to sales, to marketing, to IT, and bringing all those elements together. And importantly, it's also establishing a single source of truth for your reference data, your master data. EPM is an ultimate garbage in, garbage out. We need to have core clean data. It needs to be managed data. We need to understand changes to your chart of accounts, to your product hierarchies, to your territories, to whatever is needed and required in order to make those decisions, and ensure it's aligned and ensure it's governed across the board. So being able to bring all of those together and give you the flexibility to deploy these at a pace that makes sense for you. So you don't have to deploy it all at once. You can deploy it modularly and grow into this overall ecosystem, leveraging the same technical platform, the same techniques, the same design principles in terms of rolling these processes out. And we've done this fairly successfully across lots of customers. We're getting close to the 6,000 customers globally. We're basically in pretty much all of the major countries of the world and pretty much all of the major industries that are out there. So if you're resistant, we've generally done it before with somebody else, and we can put you in contact with them so you can have those conversations, understand the value that those customers who've gone before you have been able to pull in through. And what's also we're very, very proud of is the fact that you, as our customers, have rated these solutions extremely high. We're a Choice Award in this year's Gartner peer review, specifically on our cloud and financial planning and analysis. So that's you telling us that we're doing a very, very good job, which is the ultimate testament and the ultimate sort of value point that we're getting. So we're very, very proud of that particular piece. It's one thing to get it from an analyst saying that you're a leader in a Magic Quadrant. It's another thing to get it from customers who are leveraging and using the applications themselves, and then them saying that you're doing a decent job in terms of where we're going. But obviously, we're not going to rest on our laurels, and we'll continue to drive things forward. And we're going to drive things forward looking at the customer at the center of everything that we do. So most of our enhancement requests and most of our direction, we're actually pulling from our online Customer Connect community. It's a rich community of about 50,000 members, including both companies as well as our partner community. And it's the ability for them to influence our roadmap. And it's also the ability for you to interact with your peers so you can understand the best ways to leverage and use the services that we put in place. It's the ability to pose questions saying, we've tried to do this. Has anybody done something similar? And getting advice from that broader ecosystem in terms of, yeah, we've done it here. You should use this particular feature function in order to drive it forward. But it's also a way for you to give us enhancements, give us your ideas. Wouldn't it be good if the system did this? And Harry and his product management team are moderating this. We're ensuring that the quality of advice you're getting is correct. We're also then using that to pull in that enhancement list so that we can actually reflect that back in the applications themselves. And instead of waiting several years for that to occur, if your idea has got a lot of traction in the community as a whole, a lot of likes, it moves up the queue faster. And so we can then get that into it in a matter of months rather than an extended period of time, so we can return that back into the fleet itself. We've also invested fairly heavily in digital, so a lot more in-product help, a lot more videos and tutorials as part and parcel of the overall system, guided learning as part and parcel of the application, so you can actually construct this and make it easier for you onboarding your users into it. And we're also spending a lot of time trying to provide you the information so that you can, mitigate issues before they even show up. Here's some leading indicators that we're seeing that your system's starting to head and drift in the wrong direction, and you can course correct and make sure that it remains as performant and delivering the value to your customers as best we can. We've also made some significant changes with respect to our support organization. And frankly, it's a reflection of a change to software as a service. So in the prior on-premise days, we basically had maintenance revenue that we would pay, and fundamentally we were running support as a profit center when it's all said and done. Once you've moved to software as a service, and that's included within the overall subscription, it needs to run as a cost center. And in order to run that effectively, we've actually changed the management of that. Instead of being in the field as part and parcel of our sales organization, we've moved it into the development organization itself. So we've broken down the walls between support and development so we can increase the frequency and interaction between those two important constituents to deliver quicker resolution time and an increase in satisfaction with leveraging the products. Really trying to increase the knowledge within our support teams and the ability for you to interact with the appropriate experts quicker and faster, so you can actually get a much better level of service. And then the last thing that we have done inside of development is that we've sponsored a series of programs that can help you with your shift to the cloud. Everything from a detailed HFM analysis program where we can look at your existing HFM application and give you advice in terms of how that would map into our consolidation in the cloud. So you can feel comfortable that the requirements that you've delivered inside of HFM can actually be replicated and delivered through the cloud product itself. So if you haven't taken advantage of that program, do reach out to us. We can get that in place so we can help you through that journey. But once you get onto the cloud, we've got programs like our implementation success program, where we will advise yourselves and your partner in terms of here's the latest best practices that are occurring in the application development world. We'll review your designs, make sure they're conforming to what we would consider best practices. We'll be able to give you updates in terms of where we are from a roadmap standpoint, so that instead of investing in this workaround, why don't you defer that feature for a while, because it's going to become part of the core system in 2 months. You can then make a heads up decision in terms of whether to do the extension or to wait for the feature to come in as core. And then we'll do performance testing on your behalf and give you the results of that and a readout in terms of here's what else can be done in order to ensure that you can actually roll forward comfortably through your implementation. And then we do offer a series of services post-implementation. This is not just getting you live and you never hear from us again. We can come back in again and do a health check, just do a quick what's occurring, what's happening, are the capacity appropriate in terms of resourcing? Is there other changes that you've done? A refresher on operations, a refresher on how to interact and work with Oracle in the most effective manner. So it's really investment of putting the customer at the center of everything that we do, so we can increase your satisfaction in terms of what you and value you're getting out of the services we deliver. So again, a quick visual. It's a single integrated platform, same technology across the board, same look and feel, same programmatic interfaces from REST or from a command line orientation to really manage and run these services and processes. And again, gives you that broad coverage from detailed account reconciliation to, if you wanted to go detailed zero-based budgeting and everything in between. And then basically sandwich with a standard reporting layer that adds not just the numbers, but the full commentary. And then this enterprise data management, the ability to integrate to source systems and the ability to manage your reference data in a holistic fashion, not just up into enterprise performance management, but more importantly, down across your transactional systems. So a single place to manage change to the reference data, be it in ERP, be it in CX, be it in consolidation, and be able to keep that consistently done from that perspective. So in terms of where we go on roadmap, which is pretty much why you're all here to listen to, as we look forward, we generally have got a series of focus areas. And on the planning side, it's really in this notion of XP&A. So moving away from just financial FP&A to XP&A, covering across all of the aspects of the operational world. We've got offerings for, say, strategic workforce planning that's really geared towards your HR experts in your organization. So they can look at your strategy and then determine, do you have the sufficient skills across your organization to deliver against that strategy or not? And if not, here's what can be done in order to address that gap so that your strategy is not at risk. We've got things like sales planning, quota management, territory management, key account planning. Again, interacting with your systems, doing the what ifing around how you should structure your sales team, what's the most effective way to put that in place, so you can establish appropriate targets for them that they can deliver against, and ensuring that you're not overpaying from too relaxed targets with over commissions from that perspective. But it can also be areas like supply chain integration or working with IT. And again, these specific investments that we're making in order to drive value in those areas, core feature function coming from the Oracle development team, so you're not having to develop it yourselves. We're also doing some innovation. Everything from machine learning, artificial intelligence, improving our user experience with our Redwood, which is a cross-Oracle broad perspective. You've seen it on our PowerPoints. You've seen it on our website. It's no longer that angry rage Oracle shouting at you. It's the softer side. We've gone, eco around that particular standpoint. And really just a reflection and change of how Oracle is shifting away from the aggressive organization that we may have been in the past to a much amenable and easy to work with organization as we drive things forward from SaaS and from cloud in general. We've also got things like, our digital assistant. So the ability to interact through SMS, the ability to interact maybe through voice. So changing the nature of how you actually work with the data and how you work with the systems and processes. We also continue to invest in our enterprise scale. So as part and parcel of subscription, we're actually uplifting all of our customers at no cost to them in terms of the hardware standpoint to the latest and greatest set of hardware that we have in place. So faster chips, faster I/O at the disk level, improve reliability across the board in terms of shifting away from hardware orientation to software-driven orientation. Things like moving away from hardware load balancers to load balancer as a service, so we can manage things much more effectively and much more cleanly from that perspective. We're also looking to increase the level of integration that we do specifically across the Oracle set of families. So as you move, say, to Cloud ERP, you will see an uplift in the level of integration that we have. The ability to mix and match the user experience. So providing you a single pane of glass that could get you access to a transactional activity like posting a journal, to also looking directly at a report that's generated out of your planning application, all from a single user experience. So no longer multiple URLs, no longer be able to jump across and get confused with the multiple systems. So integration at a deeper core level in terms of data, process, user experience, and we'll continue to drive that forward. And lastly, it's also about functional integration. functional integration in terms of just the general innovations that we want and need to do across the processes. Again, a lot of this is coming from yourselves, telling us wouldn't it be good if we could have this instead of the product. We're also looking at some industry specific needs. So we've done some investments for, say, those verticals that may require the 13th period specifically in a planning context, and being able to handle that. So retail is a great example where we've done some investments, and we'll continue to look at where we're going from those particular areas. And hopefully next year we'll be able to launch a new cash forecasting solution, really looking at cash from a much broader perspective. Not just looking at long term, but more medium to short term. What can you do with the excess cash that you may have? Do you have enough cash to cover the demands that's been placed upon that or not? And being able to model and what if around those particular perspectives, so we get a much more tighter alignment around the leveraging of that important resource. So let's just delve into in a little bit more detail. So as we said, planning is not a one size fits all. And anybody who's spousing that doesn't know and understand how diverse planning can fundamentally be. As you move into sales and marketing or supply chain or human resources, the dimensionalities will be different. The time horizon can be different. The user community can be different. And because of those differences, if you adopted a centralized one model that fits all, you're fundamentally in a suboptimal space. You've basically made compromises where nobody is going to be happy with the model. It doesn't provide the level of detail and the level of agility in order for you to really drive that forward. But you don't want these to be independent applications entirely. You need to be able to have a degree of conformity so that you can ensure information, but don't give up 100% conformity. Establish a good balance between the two, and that's fundamentally our next generation approach. It's the ability to establish processes that do exist with different life cycles, but are connected together. So the best way to sort of mentally get this into your picture, if you take, say, a P&L, it's taking out lines of those P&Ls and blowing each line into its own model. So you can then go through in detail what that would look like, but the ability to pull all those back together in order to really address the broader, wider need. So it's things like that we've seen from our modules in the past, the financials, the workforce, the strategic workforce, the CapEx, the projects, as well as some of the new areas that we've expanded into. We've got quite a lot of NetSuite customers who are actually leveraging our planning application in part and parcel of their solution. So not only have we done integration directly with Cloud ERP and integration through the EPM agent to your on-premise PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, and e-business suite, as well as SAP and others. We continue to drive value add for the NetSuite community base in terms of that piece. And we're also working on solutions in more vertical orientation, things like a solution for healthcare providers, so they can manage their revenue and expense from a driver orientation. It's the integrated business planning and execution, so that integration with supply chain and understanding those elements and aspects with material costs and nuances in that area. And also it's IT financial management, the ability to run IT as a business. How IT is moved towards assured services. How do you transparently explain the cost allocation that IT is posing on a particular department based upon the uses that department has of IT services, and really helping IT to that visibility and understanding. So we've deployed these modules. A lot of it is pre-built content, but they're all very much configurable. It's not a one size fits all. If you need to make extensions, by all means make extensions in those areas. But know that we're continuing to enhance and drive these forward, either with new features, adopting for new accounting standards, being able to do tighter integrations for the underlying systems, but we're also then adding in some of the innovations. So you will see machine learning come into these particular applications. You will see digital assistants show up in the specific notions around these applications as well. So it is something that we'll continue to invest heavily in terms of really driving value for customers. In terms of the machine learning, we've done a broad piece of work, and this has basically been a journey, and we've been delivering this in phases, for some considerable time now. We started off with the auto prediction. So it's basically the statistical forecasting that we've had in the system for quite a while. That's looking at your history, understanding from the history which algorithm that correlates to the most. We do an evaluation across 13, 14 different algorithms, find the one that matches correctly, and then leverage that to forward project. We've seen it been used quite successfully in quite a few customers, from Kraft Heinz to Tony Chocolonely, based out of the Netherlands, where they're leveraging this to fundamentally forecast at the SKU level in terms of demand for their specific goods and services. The other area that we have done some work is recognizing that you may have done an investment in data science, and you may have some data scientists inside of your organization, and you want to marry that to your planning information specifically. So I may want to take inputs from planning, feed that into the algorithms, have those algorithms project and bring those results back into the EPM context. And so we provided the ability to reach out, leveraging our REST APIs and leveraging our Groovy extensions in order to execute those algorithms that live on top of your data science platform. It could be AWS, it could be Microsoft, it could be TensorFlow from Google, or it even could be the Oracle data science platforms themselves, either operating in the database or inside of the data science cloud. So it's the ability to leverage the investment you have in place and leverage the expertise that you have in-house in order to leverage and do those particular activities. The third part is sometimes you may want to have a segregation between the learning platform, so as you train your models and know what those mean, and the execution of that model. So we do allow you the ability to train externally, generate the model, typically in a PMML format, and then load that into the EPM system itself and execute that directly inside of EPM. So it's really trying to optimize for latency, and it's useful in those circumstances where the underlying data doesn't change that dramatically, or the model doesn't need to be trained that often. So you end up having some control as the finance exec in terms of standardizing the model, having it static for a period of time, so your users can gain trust in that. And then as you improve the quality and confidence in that, move to a more real-time self-learning models as they drive it forward. And then the other area that we have spent some time and energy in is this notion of insights. So insights is fundamentally, we're trying to apply machine learning to the analytical process. Can we look across your data, identify patterns in that data, and then surface to you things that you may be interested in? And if you understand and know those particular elements, you can then decrease your analytical time substantially. So rather than the traditional model of load it into SmartView and slice and dice and pivot and try to find, what we're really doing is highlighting things. Here's a rock you should look under. There's something here in the data that is an anomaly, and maybe you should pay attention to that. And then really try and know and understand this. Just really letting the data speak to you, and for you then to understand and know exactly what's occurring from the data standpoint. So some of the analysis that we've actually put in place inside of the core system break into these three categories. So fundamentally, forecast or bias analysis. So really it's comparing two forecasts, or really comparing forecast to actuals. So here was my forecast, here's the actuals coming in, and you can then see the difference between those two and try to understand where that difference is. So this is really trying to address the glass half full, glass half empty condition that we all generally have. I'm pessimistic and therefore I put in a low forecast and my actual will always come in higher. I'm optimistic and I put in a very generous forecast and I never actually deliver on that. And if you can reduce that gap between those things, you end up with a much, much more accurate forecast. So it's really trying to identify those style of problems. With the prediction insight, it's really looking at a forecast that I've put in place and looking at the machine forecast and seeing the difference between the two and having that conversation. What do I know that the machine doesn't know? And what does the machine know that I don't know? So again, we can reduce that gap and see exactly what's occurring and improve those accuracies from that standpoint. And then the last one is fundamentally just anomalies. It's looking at trends over time, be it forecast or actuals, and trying to identify when things go awry, when they start to deviate from a normal pattern. And we can basically go, that looks odd. We need to understand why that's gone odd. Sometimes it's data quality, sometimes it can be business conditions, sometimes it can be that signal that you're after, and really trying to understand what's occurring and what's happening. So in terms of what that ultimately looks like, this is a mock-up, and we've very close to releasing this and making this available for all customers. And so fundamentally, you get a list of these insights, and you get a list of the nature and type, and then the ability to jump into it, add commentary around it. You can then close off these insights in terms of we know and understand what this is, or we need to explore this a little bit more in terms of where things are going. So again, it's something that we've gone through with a preview. We've got a lot of very good feedback on. We're very happy to release this into the service itself, and we hope that you'll be able to look at this and see exactly where we're going and how we can actually help and drive that. The next area that we've done is, as you've seen from some of the charts that we're producing, the screenshots, is the investment in Redwood. So the ability to really uplift the quality that we have in place. We've seen, obviously, from the consumer grade products on your phone, et cetera, from that standpoint, is that the level of interface you can actually put in place. And frankly, there's no excuse for us as enterprise software developers not to have a similar experience. And so we're spending a lot of time and energy really trying to figure out the right way to pull these together, working with our user experience experts to really drive, eye-popping, eye-catching, easy to use, intuitive interfaces as we move this forward. This won't happen overnight. So we'll see portions of this come in across the applications, and this is in a broader Oracle context, not just within EPM. And then over time, we'll merge and homogenize to a single interface, what that looks like holistically from that perspective. So you'll see spots of this coming in through, and then, and ultimately it'll spread across the entire user interface as we reinvent and re-uplift these particular elements. And as you said, not all interfaces need to be pointer, mouse, and click. We have released the digital assistant. It's available for close and account reconciliations today, and planning coming in shortly next year. But it's the ability for you to interact, either in this example that we've put in place here, fundamentally from an SMS perspective, to be able to type in or voice in, interactions. Simple questions like, how many open recons do I have? Show me the ones that I have in place, or it can be, what tasks do I have if I've enabled task management and close management. So it's the ability to interact with the system no matter where you are. And again, we can appeal to the millennials and the Gen Zs and the other folks who are entering into the marketplace today. They've grown up on a mobile phone in the hand, and that's what they leverage and use. So we wanted to basically expand and leverage that on a go-forward basis. In terms of investments in this area, obviously coverage. So we want to broaden this to include all activity across EPM. But we also want to then inject this into a much more collaborative orientation. So integration to, say, Slack, or integration to Microsoft Teams. So the whole notion is that you could be in one of these collaborative tools and invite the EPM digital assistant to the conversation. So say you're on Zoom and invite EPM into the Zoom meeting, and you're having a conversation around, you could be looking at, say, a board report, and then asking the EPM digital assistant to record activities or to fire off processes as a result of that. So changing the dynamic of a meeting, instead of being, we all get together and somebody takes notes, and then somebody then goes out elsewhere and then fires these things off, you could kick it off directly from inside of that meeting. So at some point in time in the future, hopefully not too distant, you're having a review and you suddenly realize we need to reforecast. Ask the digital assistant to kick off the reforecasting process, and then establish the workflows and generate that, and send out the emails to everybody and tell them that this segment of the business needs to reforecast their plan, and it needs to be done in the next 2 weeks, and have all that handled straight from that meeting without having a need to go do anything else. And again, we continue to drive value add for those customers who are investing in the full Oracle stack. So the ability to integrate much more tightly with financials, product management, et cetera, the ability to leverage our digital assistants across the board. So it's not just a digital assistant for EPM, it's a digital assistant for Oracle. To be able to interact both at the EPM perspective, but also at the detailed transactional perspective from a single interface, et cetera, from that standpoint. And again, as we make improvements in technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, we'll identify the use cases where that's appropriate in an EPM context and bring those to value add in really helping you and drive things forward. So in terms of the roadmap itself, again, we've just, for those who are not familiar, we do a monthly update. This happens to be the 2110 is fundamentally October of 21. Fairly simple in order to understand. 2111 will be our next month update. 2112 will be a December update, and then we'll flip into the 22s as we go forward. But there's some key things that we have been able to pull out recently that we just wanted to highlight before we turn over to questions. One of those is that, we've done this work of enterprise journals. So the notion is that inside of EPM context, we do sometimes create journals that need to get posted back into the underlying transactional system. So think of account reconciliations with corrective adjustments. Ultimately, think of top-sided entries that we do in close that we may want to post back to the ledger, as the ledger is the source of truth from that standpoint. It could be even from a cost and profitability standpoint. We've loaded things in, we've done a bunch of management allocations, and we want to push those allocations back into the ledger. Enterprise journals is the vehicle to make that a process. So rather than an ETL, you actually have a process with approvals, formatting, et cetera, from that standpoint, and full validation back to the source system. So we know it's going to be posted and posted accurately and get confirmation as we work our way through that. Before we don't want to forget about our on-premise customers. We continue to support that with an 11.2. We're under Premier support all the way through, 11.1.2 is under Premier support through December of this year. And then our 11.2 is basically under Premier support all the way through December of 2032. We have shifted the model in terms of we've moved to a quarterly release cadence. We're trying to make it easier for you to keep pace as we move forward. So rather than having a big release every 3 to 4 years, it's really giving you small releases on a recurring basis. And we're trying to work on making that as easy to adopt as you would adopt security updates from, say, Microsoft or from some of the other vendors that are in your space. So it's an area that we're continuing to drive forward. In terms of investment themes for the on-prem, 4 major themes we're looking at. How can we make it easier to manage and improve that particular aspect, both from a technical deployment perspective, but also inside of the core applications themselves. We were doing some targeted user experience uplifting. So looking at and really listening to where you're finding it difficult to do things, where you're making common mistakes, and really trying to enhance that particular piece. And obviously making sure that we adhere to, ADA and other requirements that are in place for those organizations that are following those regulations. The technical infrastructure, again, something that we continue to drive forward, later versions of Essbase, later versions of operating systems, browsers, and also the ability to leverage the Oracle cloud infrastructure should you want to move to that fashion. So rather than outsourcing it to, say, Amazon or Azure, use Oracle infrastructure, have Oracle run on Oracle, and gain advantages from that perspective. And again, we'll continue to support you from a global perspective, both from our support desk as well as from the languages and localizations that we put in place. So hopefully through this, you've seen where we're going. The fact that we do have a very, very comprehensive solutions, both for our on-prem as well as for our cloud customers. We do have a very, very resilient community and ecosystem. And hopefully we're gaining your trust in terms of your innovation partner. And so with that, if we've got any time left, we'll turn it over for questions should any arise.
We had a few online questions, Matt. A couple of them are probably worth repeating. I've shared the link for Cloud Customer Connect in Q&A as well as on chat. So those of you who are not yet part of this community should definitely look to join this. As Matt said, there is a lot of crowd wisdom there available through the Cloud Customer Connect community. And also, as Matt mentioned, it's the forum. Idea Labs is the forum for you to submit enhancement requests that you would like to see in the EPM offering. Okay, that's question number 1. Question number 2, I think there is some interest around the Insights capability. There was a question specifically around whether Insights is available for customers who are on ePBCS versus just the customers who are on the newer EPM suite SKUs. The answer is it is available also on ePBCS, provided you're using hybrid BSO. All right. So there's a question for you. I'll pass this to you, Matt. Any updates on when the new version of Essbase will work with the new version of EPM?
So is that EPM cloud or EPM on-prem?
I'm assuming it's EPM on-prem.
I'll take both. So with EPM on-prem, what we have done is taken a phased approach. So things like SmartView in financial reports today do work against a standalone deployment of Essbase 21C. So you can deploy 21C and then have an EPM deployment on 11.2.5, I believe is the earliest, and that can then talk to that version of Essbase. We're currently in the process of certifying planning. I believe that's in in the 21.7 update, 11.127 update, where we'll be, again, in a very, very similar fashion, do your deployment of S-Base standalone, deploy EPM, and then have planning point to 21C S-Base. The one that's still outstanding is cost and profitability, and I think that delayed just a little bit, but our plan is to, again, be in that condition and have that be supported either in the 21.8 at the latest in terms of 11.128 at the latest in terms of that pace. So that's kind of the on-prem. So our goal is to standalone deploy of 21C and have EPM point to it and leverage and use that, okay? So that will address that from an on-prem standpoint. In the cloud, we're taking a slightly more cautious approach. And part of that is frankly, we have to update, I can't remember the number of time, but it could be 30,000 environments over a weekend. So we want to make sure that's bulletproof. So before we roll out a new version of S-Base, we want to make sure there's zero regressions. Your applications will behave as they should behave. And we're taking a very, very prescribed way to work our way through that process so that when it is deployed in the cloud, it works and works over a weekend where frankly, I don't get 30,000 phone calls on Monday morning that the applications aren't working. So we'll take a very cautious approach to rolling it out given the volume that we have to update over a weekend. So that is in the works, it's planned, more than likely calendar 22, deliverable into the cloud.
All right. There was another question related to can a customer who's just on-premise join Cloud Customer Connect? Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I believe Cloud Customer Connect is oriented towards the cloud right now. So as an on-prem customer, you probably won't see much value there, except to sort of understand how cloud adoption is going and what sort of experiences cloud customers are having. You can get a preview of it before you are moving up to the cloud. Is that fair?
That is fair. Though, Harry, we have established a community for on-premise customers. Do you remember the URL that we have for that one?
I will ask Al to post it. I don't remember. I have the overall.
Yeah, it's something similar that we're really looking to expand for the on-premise customers so they're not felt left behind. So they've got a specific area where they can go post their ideas and interact with each other in terms of what's occurring, what's happening with the 11.2 series as it goes forward.
Okay, so Al has actually posted the on-prem community link on the chat window, so please take note here. All right, I think that may be all the time we have. We are over the allotted time by a few minutes already. I think we had good participation. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Matt, for the presentation.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. And if you've got more questions, you know how to reach out and get those answered. Okay, thanks very much.